Hello and welcome to the Gaggle, where we challenge and, if necessary, destroy media narratives. On this edition of the Gaggle, we're going to continue our discussion on what's going on around the Navalny case. Of course, I have one of the most eminent experts on things like this, is Dmitry Babich. Dima, thank you for getting up so early this morning. Dima, give our viewers a rundown. What's going on right now? Because a lot of accusations are being made. And again, as is the pattern, very little evidence is being presented to the public. Your take. Go ahead, Dima.
Well, I won't talk much about the reaction on the Western side because we know it. Chancellor Merkel has been talking about some kind of a united response from the West. She said that Navalny became a victim of a crime. Boris Johnson talked about the chemical weapon used against Navalny. He said that we have first-hand knowledge of that weapon here in Britain, which is ironic because no one had first-hand knowledge of what happened in Salisbury. No journalist had access to Sergei and Yulia Skripal's, and we were never shown, the formulas were never shown, the diagnosis. We were not shown anything. So if the government just invented it, no one would have noticed because there was so little information released. What is interesting with Navalny case, I'm observing the reaction of the public in Russia. And this is the most surprising thing. I think that will probably be interesting for our viewers abroad. People took it very badly that Navalny was met by 18 motorcades in Germany. The older generation remembered that basically Gorbachev started losing his popularity in Russia exactly at the moment when he openly became a darling of the Western elites. People immediately started having suspicions. They could not even formulate it. It was not then allowed to say it on television or publish it in the newspapers, but immediately there was that unease in Russia that this guy is more about the West than about us. Why does he need us if he has 18 motorcades meeting him in Germany? So little by little, I noticed there is very little sympathy. There is almost no shock. I'm probably a minority. I think that whatever the reasons, what happened to Navalny was a tragedy because we saw a man obviously in acute pain. We saw a man in coma. And for me, it's always a tragedy. Whatever we think about his convictions, whatever we think about his standing in society, and he was basically losing ground, especially in the last 2 or 3 years. I think that the whole Ukrainian crisis was bad for the Russian opposition because it was like a false start for them. It was a very convincing pro-government show. What happens when you make a revolution in a post-Soviet country, in a Slavic post-Soviet country. So he was basically losing ground, and the Russian government absolutely had no interest in removing him. Right now, he has been active in Russian politics, let me remind you, for more than 10 years now. Active not just as an activist, but as someone whom just about everyone using internet knows.
Exactly. He has I think that's really important to point out to our viewers here is that even I think it was 2 weeks ago, I was in the Moscow metro and I saw a young person watching one of Navalny's videos. And so, he absolute freedom to express his views. I mean, and I would say because of his views, he was losing popularity. So keep going, my friend.
Well, he was, I think, convincing for a part of the population in the early 2010s because inequality was obvious.
Yeah.
It was not so insulting as it was in the 90s because the richest people under Putin stopped having preferential access to the media. In the 90s, the rich oligarchs like Gusinsky or like Berezovsky, they were not just rich people, and they were not just wielding power. They were everywhere on television, you know. Or people just, the media talked about their quarrels, about their decisions all the time. In the 2010s, that was gone. But of course, there was inequality, and people took it very seriously because there was economic growth. In general, the population felt itself relatively stable. And this is the moment when you can think about inequality, about making society more.
Okay, I think we need to kind of back up here. I mean, Navalny, his entire selling point, if I can say that, was anti-corruption. Okay, and this is something that he highlighted.
Exactly, and very often it was not just anti-corruption. It was about like these rich, influential people. They all have property abroad. Mm-hmm. So the West, they criticize the West, but they're hypocritical. They actually have homes abroad. Well, I may be not a very representative person, but I have no bad feelings about people having property abroad. You know, for 70 years, we could not dream of traveling to our own homes abroad. Suddenly, we have the first generation that could afford it. But anyway, it was really taken badly by the population because the population smelled hypocrisy here. Well, now you see real action from the West. You see real hatred towards rich and influential people in Russia. This is not imitated. And these people, if they had homes abroad, they're losing them now. They're probably selling them at bargain basement prices because look what is written in the newspapers. Look what the Western politicians say. Look at this law. CATSA, you know, which basically obliges the American intelligence to keep track of all the rich people in Russia who have connections to the government. Show me a rich person who has no connections to the government. That's an oxymoron.
Well, I mean, yeah, but I think it really cuts both ways because you don't have to be in the opposition to be angered by that. I mean, average people feel resentment as well. Okay, so I mean, that's not really a defining issue that separates the government, the general population, and the so-called opposition. How do Russians feel about Navalny? There's no evidence being presented. He's not spoken. I mean, the Skripals never did. I mean, how is this being interpreted? Because, I mean, until there's more evidence, I'm sorry, it looks like some kind of operation or a cover-up. I mean, this is when you're not transparent, it feeds into conspiracy. Dima.
Well, people just feel puzzled. And unpleasantly puzzled, I would say. So just to finish off with the position, Navalny was appealing to this emotional non-acceptance of inequality. His positive program was not known. He just said that he would do everything very nicely, and somehow not entirely as it is done in the West. He kept stressing that he was Russian, that Russia has connections to Slavic Ukraine. By the way, he basically welcomed the so-called revolution in Ukraine, saying that Ukrainians are Slavs, so we must deal with them much better than with Central Asians who have dictatorships. You know, they're paving the way, Ukrainians, I mean. And that was exactly the opposite of what the majority of people felt, because the borders with Ukraine are shut down now. You know, people are afraid to travel. We have to build new railroads bypassing Ukraine. So Navalny definitely struck the wrong chord at that moment, and that was one of the reasons why he was basically becoming unimportant, you know, during all of these years. So now what happens is that there are no explanations, and I would say there are no explanations on both sides, because the Western side doesn't show Navalny. They don't show the reasons why the German doctors decided that he was infected by Novichok.
Or Novichok, something related to Novichok, something that would resemble it. We have to be very clear. That's what the German doctors, at least we've been told in public.
Then the question is, he felt badly, he felt sick inside a plane. Why isn't everyone in that plane feeling sick now, because Novichok is a powerful chemical weapon that basically affects.
Yeah, but it doesn't seem to kill very many people, does it?
Yeah, and by the way, you know, planes, they are, we know that they're isolated. It's an isolated space. You know, there's no way people could not feel the effect if he had Novichok inside. Why are these people not evacuated, put in hospitals? You know, why is there no scandal? Then the Russian explanation, to my mind, is also not complete, because okay, they say that he had no poison in his body. There are just some problems with sugar. Well, people do not lose conscience because of problems with sugar. You know, people don't have comas. He's in a coma. He was in a coma in Russia. So obviously, some powerful political force was involved in this.
Well, or some powerful force. I mean, unfortunately, the Western media is always political. Well, I go back to what I said a little bit earlier. One of his mantras was anti-corruption, and he made a lot of accusations against business people. Until we're given evidence that he really was poisoned, I'm going to withhold any kind of judgment. But I mean, let's agree that he was. It doesn't necessarily mean it would have been done by a government official. I mean, that's not a direct logical connection.
Well, yes. So I do not exclude. Basically, I think the fact that he is in coma shows that he was poisoned, but by whom? And how can we believe the Western version if there are no traces of Novichok found, and if people are not feeling sick? You know, the people who were inside that plane. Why is he not shown on German television? You know. Why did the German government prefer to make a special statement? Instead of the doctors, it was the German government spokesman who let us know that the German doctors discovered Novichok there. Why was there no German doctor who would just be sitting there before the cameras and saying, okay, here's this formula, here is what we found, here is, I don't know, the result of the chemical reaction that we conducted. There was nothing scientific. There was just Stefan Seibert, you know, the official representing Chancellor Merkel, saying this and saying that that was, I quote, beyond any doubt. Well, I'm always suspicious when government people say that something is beyond any doubt, because especially if it involves poisonings, you know, poisonings by complicated substances, you know, this is something that you need an expert opinion on, definitely. Okay, maybe the German government was reluctant to have a press conference by doctors. Well, let journalists ask them questions, you know. Right now we have that anonymous body, you know, Bundeswehr laboratory working somewhere in Bavaria, which was invited to Charité clinic and which came to this conclusion. Let me remind you that it was the same clinic that found out that former president of Ukraine, Viktor Yushchenko, was poisoned by dioxin. Well, later, let me remind you, when the West lost interest in him, when Yushchenko was losing the next election, he became very unpopular. Suddenly, all talk about this was dropped, you know, that they never tried to find, you know, the perpetrators. Suddenly, there was absolutely no interest. And Yushchenko's own people who quarreled with him started saying that this was a provocation by someone else, definitely not by Russia or by Kuchma's officials, that this was a provocation aimed against Russia and against Kuchma's officials, because Russia was definitely not interested.
Well, this is a pattern here, and we have more questions than we have answers, and we're going to keep an eye on it here. Dima, thank you for joining the Gaggle to discuss this. If you like this video, please like, share, and subscribe. We'll be back.